always trying to do the best we can to say what is the level that people need to thrive, not just survive.
Hello and welcome to CSU's Spur of the Moment, the podcast of Colorado State University's Spur campus in Denver, Colorado.
If we can make sure that people do have the water they need for all their household needs, but also their community gardens, or if they have livestock, making sure their livestock can have enough water to drink, then you can really start talking about change, and people can have economic opportunities instead of spending 5 hours a day walking to get water because there's one borehole really far away.
On this podcast, we talk with experts in food, water, and health and learn about their current work and their career journeys. Today, I'm joined by Cindy Kushner, Chief of Climate Resilient Water Sanitation and Hygiene at UNICEF. Cindy has had a varied career, with much of it focused internationally on water, sanitation, and hygiene issues. Welcome, Cindy.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely happy to have you. I'd like to start a little with the term water, sanitation, and hygiene, or WASH. What is encompassed in that term, WASH?
Water is something that is used for so many different things and ways. But what we're focused on in UNICEF and my work is on drinking water and water for domestic use. So first and foremost, making sure that it is safe for drinking. It is available, which is not always a given, unfortunately, particularly in the places that we work. And sanitation it means something broader, but fundamentally in its core, it means toilets for us. And making sure people have, again, safe, dignified places to use a toilet. Instead of kind of picking a technology and saying it's a toilet, the way that we know in the US, it's about a place that can really separate the human waste from human contact. And that opens up more technological options, more affordable options for different environments and different places and different economies. And then hygiene is primarily, again, it's a very broad term, but we're talking about hand washing with soap and water and making sure you can do that everywhere you need to, as well as menstrual hygiene management, because girls and women very fundamentally need to ensure that they have the information, the resources, the facilities, the products that they need to manage their menstruation. And if we don't have that, then we don't have adequate hygiene, particularly for girls and women.
Great, thank you. So can we talk a little bit about where you are working? So you've hit on these WASH areas: safe and available drinking water, sanitation, hand washing, menstrual sanitation. Where are you focused on those different topics? And can you describe a few of the challenges that you are particularly focused on addressing?
Sure. So I'm currently working in Zimbabwe, which is a country in Southern Africa, about 15 million people, give or take. It's been a while since we had a census. There was just one, so we're waiting for those results. Zimbabwe is one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world. Some people may have heard in 2019, there was Cyclone Idai, which was very destructive, particularly in Mozambique, but also very much in Zimbabwe and a few other surrounding countries. So there's an increasing intensity and frequency of cyclones, which is sort of what they call a hurricane in the Southern Hemisphere, but a lot more storms and ferocious storms and heavy rains, as well as not just the cyclone and those heavy rains. Break through rivers, wash communities out, wash water systems out, schools, healthcare facilities, and very destroyed roads, bridges. And so there's always an effort to make sure that we are not only able to respond when those things happen, but also try to be more aware of those risks when we're building things in the first place and we're putting in place what needs to be managed and how we need to have warnings and things like that, so that we're really doing all we can before as well as immediately afterwards to ensure people are safe and they have what they need, particularly drinking water and sanitation are the utmost first needs that are needed once an emergency hits. But Zimbabwe is very interesting because part of the country is very vulnerable to heavy rain, storms, and cyclones, and the other part of the country is in drought. And so probably similar to kind of challenges you have in Colorado and in the Western U.S. We go long periods with not enough water, and in a place where we rely on groundwater, the water that's under the ground as opposed to surface water and rainfall, the rainfall recharges the underground water. And if there's not that rainfall, then that water's not getting recharged. And then when we go to pump it out, it's either not there or it's deeper and deeper and deeper, which is more and more and more expensive. And particularly in Zimbabwe, in contrast to the Western US, is that the population is quite sparse. And so you have small communities dotting the landscape as opposed to huge populations where you can justify a much larger investment. And so it's very difficult to build a huge water system for a couple hundred people, but there's those couple hundred people all over the place really add up. And so if we can make sure that people do have the water they need for all their household needs, but also their community gardens, or if they have livestock, making sure their livestock can have enough water to drink, then you can really start talking about change, and people can have economic opportunities instead of spending 5 hours a day walking to get water because there's one borehole really far away. So it's really quite life-changing, and we're always trying to do the best we can to say what is the level that people need to thrive, not just survive.
Maybe we could take a step back and let's talk a little bit about, and I'll use a water analogy. What are the buckets of your work? I don't want to characterize it wrong. So maybe you could give us what are the major categories of the work that you're doing?
Sure. And I think that very much the way we look at it is what we call an enabling environment or strengthening the systems. So we need to have policies. Again, in this country, we have, the National Water Act, and you have federal and state policies, strategies. You need to know what you're going to do and what's going to guide your investment. What do you need to do? Who needs to do what capacities do you need? So we work on that side. We need monitoring because it's about the most boring thing you could talk about is monitoring. But if you don't know who has water and who doesn't, how are you targeting your resources?
Right. Very important part of decision making.
Very important part of decision making. And so sort of having that data and making sure you're translating that data into information and knowledge. So within the enabling environment, we have the policy side, we have the monitoring side, and then we need budgeting, right? So government budgeting is a long, complex process. And what we're really, we as UNICEF, we do a lot of implementation, we do build things. There's a lot of partners around the world that do things, NGOs and nonprofits, all sorts of different organizations. But the main funder of water sanitation hygiene is the government, whether it's local governments or national governments. And so and that's the only truly sustainable way to do that, because nonprofits and external funding come and go, but the government needs to be the one to stay. And obviously the government doesn't always have the resources, and we all need to support that. But for UNICEF, our goal is to support the government to do its job. And in this country and in Zimbabwe and any country, it is the government's responsibility to provide drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene. There's not too many that would disagree with that, but it's not easy. And so for UNICEF, we really focus on enabling environment and aiming to work ourselves out of the job of the more nuts and bolts. And the other pieces of it, so the enabling environment, but also supply. And so that's where we put in infrastructure, but also, and again, whether that means we're building a water system or putting in a borehole, and whether we work with a local partner, an NGO, or we look with the local government, because maybe they do have the capacity, just don't have the money. But also when we talk about toilets, it isn't about someone else building them. No one walks into your house and builds your toilet when you've built your house. And so it's about saying, look, do you have the products you need to build a toilet? Or do you need to go 6 hours to the main town? That you're probably not going to build a toilet if you don't have a lot of money, and you certainly can't. You can barely afford a bag of cement. You certainly can't afford the 6-hour trip and the transport costs. So, trying to make sure that people have what they need to do what is the household responsibility, but also that they all have the knowledge and they demand to have a toilet. They demand to have water supply. So we work on the enabling environment, supply, and demand, and that's kind of the 3 buckets we put it into. And again, when we're in an emergency situation, because UNICEF works we have huge programs in Afghanistan and Yemen and South Sudan and in Ukraine right now. So there's places where there's conflict, but there's also places where there's huge natural disasters. So whether it's in Zimbabwe after Cyclone Idai, where we don't on a regular basis try to kind of just provide the service. We try to work with the government to provide the service or other partners. But when there's a massive cyclone, then it isn't. The needs are just so great, and the systems break down. And again, we saw this in the hurricane in New Orleans. There are just times where it's just too much pressure for the ongoing system, and you have to bring in outsiders.
So, Cindy, can you tell us a little bit more about UNICEF and how the WASH work that you're doing fits within the organization's broader mission?
Sure. So UNICEF is the United Nations Children's Fund. We are a part of the United Nations, which is sort of the body of the countries in the world and member states, as it were, and the governments. But we have that very specific mandate of children and their families. making sure that children's needs are met. And so we work in various sectors, I would say, but basically making sure that children have what they need to survive and thrive. So we work on education systems, we work on health systems. And again, we've all heard of WHO now with COVID, and the World Health Organization is a really important, but UNICEF really work is to ensure the health system for children. Nutrition, again, child nutrition. We've seen photos of starving children and very, very thin, and that's severe acute malnutrition. That is a very much a fundamental problem, especially where you have conflict and people are moving and they just don't have their coping mechanisms in their food. But we also have stunting, which is basically that children are not getting a nutritious diet. So we're working on stunting and making sure that children are both mentally and physically developing as healthy children. And we work on water, sanitation, hygiene, which kind of underpins all of that in terms of, you can't have good health if you have diarrhea all the time from drinking contaminated water. You can't have good nutrition if you always have diarrhea and you're not absorbing the nutrition. You can't, going to school without a toilet, or simply drinking contaminated water, not being able to go to school is a problem. But also when you go to school, making sure that there's drinking water, there's toilets, there's hand washing facilities, but also making sure that when we talk about what are good hygiene practices and good sanitation, we need to be working in schools because that's the time to teach people when they're young.
So a lot of what you're describing as it relates to WASH is really that water and sanitation piece really is an underpinning for so many of the other goals that UNICEF has. And I think we tend to take for granted in the US and in other more developed countries. These are things we don't really think about. We don't think about where your water is coming from, whether or not you have access to sanitation. It allows us to go about our day-to-day life in a very different way than people who are really concerned about that, who are spending hours getting access to clean water, et cetera. So it does seem like the international space is in some places quite different from work on water that are happening here in the States. That said, there are aspects of water and sanitation that are still real challenges across the U.S. And one of the places that the Spur campus is focused on is kind of the arid American West. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the places around the world that you see having similar challenges to water access and supply, and some of the ways that UNICEF is addressing those challenges in some of those drier places.
Around the world, climate change is, we say, climate change is sort of first felt through water. Well, drinking water is the most basic need there is, and it is absolutely being felt there. And so in the arid American West, you have water restrictions, right? And you don't lose water though. You can still turn on your tap, and you're just asked not to water your lawn or run your washing machine at certain hours and things like that. But if you're in arid Zimbabwe and you have a borehole and the water table is no longer where it used to be, right? So you put a borehole in underground and there's a water table sort of it may be 30 yards down, and if it rains less and less and less, that water table keeps going down and down and down, and then suddenly your borehole just doesn't reach the water. You got to drill a new one. You have money for that. And with climate change, we just need to keep, drilling deeper and deeper. And is that sustainable, or are we over exploiting the aquifers and the groundwater? This is very much an issue that you have in the West. How much water do you have? And when it changes, all the things that you built around that presumption start to change. They either become, in the US, that tends to be they become more expensive. And then you maybe don't have the same industries in the same place because it's no longer economically viable to have those industries, or you keep spending more and more money to bring water from further away. There's a lot of effort to manage the demand and to bring in more water saving technologies. There's a lot of innovation that comes from these kind of changes, and that's what we see here in the U.S. And when we talk about the arid parts of Zimbabwe, we're talking about things a lot more basic, a lot more simple. The use of the water is just not as complex. There's not enough water to have built industry in the first place. And again, there are dams and there is surface water in other parts of the country. We can put in bigger pipelines and bring it, but again, it's expensive. And so at the end of the day, climate change is really exacerbating the economic challenges of moving water, treating water, finding water in the first place.
Thank you. You've hit on so many different complexities within the WASH environment, particularly in the work that you do. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what it means to have your particular position. What is a day in the life for the Chief of Climate Resilient WASH at UNICEF?
I mean, I do a lot of different things in a day, and fundamentally, I'm a manager. And I would like to, I hope I'm a leader as well of my team and in the role that I play. But fundamentally, I manage resources, I manage people, I manage money, and I try to lead the strategy of how we use those resources. Fundamentally, I'm a manager and a leader in the space that I'm working. So I manage resources. I have currently in Zimbabwe, I have a team of about 13 people, making sure that each of them has a clear role and responsibility. That they each have accountability for the work that they do. They know what they need to do. They have clear expectations. We have common clear expectations so that they're able to do their job, and I'm able to support them in the way that they need to. But they can work independently and achieve their work, and that they can call on me for what they need, be it technical guidance or, I do work in a bureaucracy, and so sometimes you have to kind of use a bit of hierarchy to get through, get decisions made, get papers signed, and so that's also my job to navigate all of that to enable them to do their jobs. Fundraising and making sure that we both have money to spend as well as to spend it. And with that comes relations with the people who fund us, as well as the partners that we work with. And I am a huge believer. For me, this is really core to my work, which is the whole has to be greater than the sum of all parts. And I don't think that UNICEF has all the answers. I don't think any one organization has all the answers, all the capacities, all the expertise, all the credibility to affect the change that's needed. It's a complex space. And so for me, it's about building partnerships with those that complement us, and say, okay, this is what we do. For me, as a person, as a supervisor, as a manager, as a leader, it's recognizing what you do well and what your strengths are, and what others do well, and how you bring that together. So whether I bring that into my daily work, but I also try to bring that to my sort of how I lead the team. I do a lot of working with the government, particularly at more senior levels, and making sure that, again, that my team is able to influence the policies and the budgeting. I work closely with my health colleagues because, again, if we could end diarrheal disease, or at least the WASH-related diarrheal disease, our health colleagues would have a whole lot less work to do. And in treating people and curing diseases, similarly with nutrition. So it's really about partnerships within UNICEF and other expertise with the government, and working very closely with them and supporting them to achieve their agenda. Working with our other partners, but really managing the resources, managing the partnerships, developing all that, and providing strategy.
Yeah, so you've hit on some buckets of work that you do, and those are buckets that I think are maybe common across folks who are in a level of position that is similar to yours. Policy work, advocacy work, partnerships, fundraising, management of your team. And I guess I would be curious to hear a little bit. Let's transition a little to sort of what's your journey to this point in time, right? Because you're now in a management role within this WASH space. You have not always been in that role. Can you tell us briefly kind of what was the journey that got you, I don't know, when you were a kid, was this something you were dreaming of?
Yeah.
I want to work internationally.
No,
Like, what was the,
this is very far away where I was as
yeah.
a kid.
Right. So, and
um,
that's really common, right? Most of us have
yeah,
unexpected journeys. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your
yeah.
unexpected journey.
Sure. And I work with a lot of people whose parents worked in this sort of industry, as it were. And so they were exposed to international development, and they were exposed to working and moving around. And I was not at all. I grew up in the suburbs of Boston, but I always loved traveling. And I really wanted to be a teacher all growing up, nothing else. I was laser focused on being a teacher. And when I applied to university, I even applied to education schools. I think, it would talk about a pivotal moment, because I applied to the University of Michigan School of Education, and I received back a letter that said, well, you come into school of education when you're a junior, but we'll let you into the liberal arts college. I just thought, wow, they let me in. I couldn't even figure out the application process. They let me in. applied to the wrong school. So when I went to the University of Michigan, and I pretty quickly realized, like, I don't want to be a teacher. I feel like, what I understood teaching to be was like sitting in school and, getting your tenure and being in one place. And I thought, well, that, I want to travel and I love to meet new people. And I'm not sure that is what I want to do. And so pretty quickly, I'm quite glad that I didn't go into an education school, but I went to an arts school because I ended up majoring in political science, which was just kind of interesting to me of kind of how decisions get made and what the implications are, and critical thinking. I just found my way to DC because it seemed like the place to go, but not with a great deal of clarity. But again, still with this idea of traveling. And so I ended up working for a consulting company who implements international development programs at the admin level, but it got me in to see what it was all about. And I found my way overseas, and I found my way into emergency work first, which has a huge instant gratification. It's like, people need water, here's your water. What I came to see pretty quickly is that there's a lot of constraints that are beyond the community level. And so after years of really working at that community level, I kind of started to want to reach and influence at a higher level of saying, okay, well, these communities are all constrained by the fact that the government's not investing, or that there's no information at the government level to make a decision about what to invest in. And so I just, over my career, I just started to kind of reach into the more fundamental challenges, and kind of with that, kind of moving, I'd say, up just in terms of the governance level structures. You have, a national government, a local government, down to the community. And so I worked my way from the bottom up and kind of unlocking, saying, okay, well, here at district level, it's not just the community needs to be supported by the local authorities. Okay, let's work with the local authorities. And how do they do that? And it's like, well, they're not resourced adequately, and they don't have the policies to guide them, or they don't have the capacity. So let's keep going up. And I actually went, one of my previous roles was actually working at UNICEF headquarters and leading a global partnership of governments, of countries, of NGOs, and really coordinating a conversation and dialogue around how do we fundamentally, what is common across countries, and what are the common ways to move forward. And governments need to be in the lead. There needs to be one clear agenda, rather than everybody working on their own in silos. And so I kind of reached this, pinnacle of hierarchy for the global policy dialogue, and learned a great deal, and it was fascinating. And at the same time, always kind of yearning to come back down to it. But for me, what motivates me is that scale of getting the government to make a decision and cascade it to everybody. But I think as international organizations, we can contribute, but we don't solve problems. If we can solve a problem today, if we didn't, if the fundamental issues are not addressed, the problem just comes back. And so I'm much more interested in taking time.
One of the things I'm hearing you say that I think is really interesting is, and I think might be particularly interesting if for a young person who's sort of thinking about a career path, that you started at a grassroots level, right, at a community level, and then worked at a variety of different scales, and on kind of coming at the same problem from a variety of different perspectives or lenses, right? There's one, the immediate gratification you're talking about. You need water, I'm handing you water. There's a systemic or foundational problem that we're seeking to change at a different scale. So I think it's really, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, this is true across a lot of different career paths too, right? The scale at which,
Sure.
and which are you focused on the complex systemic problem, or are you focused on the more immediate problem? And I think throughout the course of one's career, one might pick and choose. Once you've been exposed to all of those different scales and approaches, you might find one that feels like the right fit and try to settle yourself in that space.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it was, my approach to my career early on was always, do what you enjoy, and then when it's no longer challenging, find something more. And that worked for a really long time for me. At a certain point, though, I hit a level of seniority where you need to be a bit more deliberate in defining what you want to do next, and be building those skills before you get there. And so that was a bit of a wake up call for me, that, sort of like, I'm just going to be driven by my, not so
curiosity and your interest,
curiosity, my passion, my satisfaction. And I just, and I always found opportunity through hard work and delivering, and having a reputation for myself, and being able to advance. But that wasn't enough to keep advancing, because I wasn't necessarily recognizing what the next role needed. So I think there's sort of two things here. One is what is my personal pathway, and how do you move through? It's not just a hierarchy by any means, but again, it's but for me, the sort of governance stuff is kind of stacked hierarchy. So government system. So where do you want to influence? Where do you feel energized? And I feel energized from a great meeting with a key decision maker as much as I do from a community getting water, because that community, those 200 people in that community got water, and that's amazing. But when that decision maker makes a decision to put in a budget of $20 million, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but that is the thing that will make a difference to thousands and thousands of people. And so that takes time, that takes a different skill set, but that's exciting for me.
You've been working over the course of your career in a variety of different places. How many different countries?
Long term, sort of more than a year, I was in Timor-Leste for a total of 5 years. I was in Rwanda for 3.5 years. I feel like I'm skipping something. I was in Albania in 2000, but that was less than a year, just because our funding ran out, so I had to leave. I've been in Zimbabwe for 1.5 years. I was in UNICEF headquarters for around 10 years. So there was a point where you also have to find balance in your life. And my parents were aging, and so I decided I needed to come back to the U.S. I'm from the East Coast, and so I was able to still do the work and advance my career, and work in WASH, which is my passion, but also be there for my family. And so Skype and Zoom and all these things definitely have helped a lot more than when early in my career, when I was in Albania. I got 10 minutes, a call for 10 minutes a month to call somebody at home. Or remember in Timor-Leste, it's an island country, and I was in a town that didn't have a network, but I was about 45 minutes away from the city. And so if I drove 20 minutes and I walked out onto this one spot on the beach that would get the signal from the city, I could call the US and I could talk to my mom.
So you've mentioned some of the challenges of working and living internationally. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you love about it.
Sure. I mean, there is so much, and again, I think that's the choice that me and my husband, and my family made to keep doing this work. Is that the traveling is amazing. We live in Africa, and so when we go away for a few days or a week, we're go down to Florida from the East Coast or go to California. We did head to South Africa or Kenya, and go to amazing beaches and see all sorts of new things and animals. That's a huge part of it, but also just being able to get to know people of an entirely different experience. And the people that I work with are just tremendous, and working with people in different cultures, different settings, their experiences growing up, and how they got to where they are is just a constant learning opportunity, and an opportunity for reflection on yourself and your place in the world. And that is just something that really, really keeps me going.
So, Cindy, can you tell us where people can find more information about UNICEF and particularly the WASH work that you're doing, social media, websites, etc.?
Sure. So UNICEF is a large global international organization, unicef.org, unicef.org. There's plenty of information there about WASH as well, and then sort of areas we work in. There's also, for the US particularly, while we are part of the UN, UNICEF is also affiliated with, and sort of has part of its structure is that we have national committees in many countries. And so while the UN doesn't sort of work here as the UN, we do have our sister agency, UNICEF USA, which does a lot of advocacy work for children here in the US, as well as fundraising with the public. You can also go to unicefusa.org, which is part of our UNICEF structure, where we have a nonprofit organization here in the US, which also advocates for children here in the US, as well as fundraisers for UNICEF.
Great.
But then there is a wide social media presence for both UNICEF and UNICEF USA.
Great. Thank you. So we'll also link to those resources in the show notes if anyone wants more information about UNICEF and the WASH work in particular. So now we have come to the very final question I have for you, which is our spur of the moment question. So you have traveled quite a bit, but I'm curious if there is a place that you have always wanted to travel that you have not yet been.
That is an interesting one. There are a couple. There's actually three, I think. And interestingly, I spent a lot of time in Asia and a lot of time in Africa. I would love to see the aurora borealis, the northern lights. And so that is on my bucket list.
Mine
I have
too.
never been to Scotland and hiked the Highlands. That is on my bucket list. And there's a pilgrimage that goes through Spain and Portugal, and I always get the name wrong, so I won't try to say it correctly. But it is my goal one day to probably not do the whole thing, but to do at least a part of that walk. Those are my three bucket lists.
That's the Camino de Santiago. Is that the one you're thinking?
Exactly.
Yes,
Thank you. Yes,
it's on my
the one.
list as well. That the idea of a walking vacation sounds like the right speed, but also includes a different way of seeing all of those places, right? So I love that idea too. Cindy, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate you being a guest on CSU Spur of the Moment, and hope that our paths cross again soon.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
The CSU Spur of the Moment podcast is produced by Kevin Samuelson, and our theme music is by Ketsa. Please visit the show notes for links mentioned in this episode. We hope you'll join us in 2 weeks for the next episode. Until then, be well.